Hello, members. Welcome. Good evening, one and all. I hope that you can see me and hear me, and hopefully you can now see Catherine, who's just popped up. Good evening, Catherine.
Good evening, Emma. Good evening, members.
Was that the sound of a cork popping?
No, that was the sound of a glass on a plate.
Oh, we've already popped our champagne bottles open, members, and I do hope that you have done the same. Welcome, everybody, to what I hope will be another fun-filled foodie evening with Catherine and I, taking you through some of the culinary delights of the Michel Roux Junior Meal Kit and pairing some French wines to coincide with it, all as part, I think it's the final event in our series of French events celebrating our French offer at the Wine Society. So for anyone who's not met us before, I'm Anna Spooner and this is Catherine Housden, and we are from the Tastings and Events team. Very straightforward this evening. I've hopefully given enough detail in terms of the cooking, the preparation, etc. What I would say is make sure your timer is on now for your prawn tartlets. We appreciate that 12 to 15 minutes. I personally, when I did this run through, needed the 15 minutes to get it fully cooked. So we are going to just shorten our intro ever so slightly to allow you to go and get those out of the oven. But by all means, just nip and grab them if you need to. They do need to cool down as well. They get very, very hot. So hopefully everything's crystal clear. We really encourage you to use the chat if you'd like to this evening. Let us know where you are. Let us know what you think of the pairings, of the foods, of the wines. And then if you have any questions, Catherine and I would love to answer them throughout the course of the session. You can pop them in the chat, or what's slightly easier for us to keep an eye on things is if they go into the Q&A. But this evening's very relaxed, very casual, just nice wine and nice food on a Saturday night. So please don't worry. If you pop them in the chat, we will be able to see them. So I think that is probably it from me. Catherine is going to talk about the first wine whilst we enjoy some bread, and then we will explain as we go. So don't worry. You're not going to have to remember what you need to prepare. You don't have to have printouts and menus and post-it notes. We're going to guide you through it. So at the moment, hopefully you should have some bread and butter, as I do, and then we're going to talk about the champagne, which I hope you'll agree is pretty much the perfect aperitif, but also a great foodie wine. So I'll hand over to Catherine to kick us off. So cheers, Catherine.
Cheers. Thanks, Anna. Yes, I don't know about you members, but I have been very much looking forward to this all day. I know it's a Saturday, but I did hold off until just before we started the event to open my first wine of the weekend, and for it to be the Society's champagne is just a real treat, because I know it's one that is always consistent. It's always hitting the spot for what I want a champagne to be. So as Anna said, this is what we're having as a bit of an aperitif, but also to have with the bread and butter, and the bread and butter is the ideal sort of accompaniment to have with it. It's not got too much to overpower the champagne. It really lets the wine itself sing. So this is the Society Champagne Brut non-vintage. I actually have it in a half bottle. I managed to snaffle one from the showroom, but members, you may have the full bottle, or if you're really lucky and you've got a group of you, you might have splashed out onto a magnum. But this is produced for us by Alfred Gratien. Now, Alfred Gratien, as you likely know, are one of our oldest suppliers. We've been working with them for around 116 years. We started with them in 1906, but they actually started producing wine in 1864. So they pipped us in origination by 10 years. But as I say, it's been a really long partnership, and one that we really, are seeing to continue. We've got no signs of it slowing down. And I think that's because of the consistency and the relationship that we have with them as a producer, and the relationship that they have with their suppliers and their growers and their cellar masters, which I'll come on to in a moment. But let's talk about the wine first. Hopefully you all have had a bit of a sip now, or maybe a bit of a gulp, and we'll agree that it's a really lovely, toasty, brioche style of champagne. It's very dry. It's got a really nice long finish. It's full flavored. There's some really lovely citrus notes in there, some lemon, a bit of that pithy quality as well, not just the bright fruit, but it does also have some lovely bright fruit and really fresh acidity. It is a blend of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. And in terms of production, it is the fermentation is in barrel. So the first fermentation is in barrel rather than in stainless steel. The barrels that are used are small Burgundian oak barrels, and they are sort of bought secondhand. So it's their second lease of life in wine production. They are bought from the Chablisienne co-op in Chablis. And this vinification Sous-Bois, which, in barrel vinification, is something that works really nicely with Pinot Meunier, particularly. Pinot Meunier really lends itself and works nicely with barrel fermentation. But in order for it to show its best, and also for this wine to show its best, it doesn't undergo malolactic fermentation like other wines do, other champagnes do, other white wines do. So that malolactic fermentation is the conversion of the malic acids to the lactic acids, which can give a creamier characteristic to a wine. But in this instance, it's suppressed, and that retains the acidity. And that acidity is key for the long aging potential of this wine, even though it is a non-vintage. However, the acids still do need to settle and just sort of balance themselves out within the wine. So it's not released until at least 3 years after the final stage of production, just to let those acids not be so in your face, but still have that really fresh retention, which gives it that aging potential. The oak for the first fermentation gives a really nice texture to the wine as well, which is why it is such a good champagne to have as an aperitif or as a foodie champagne. And like I said, with the bread as the sort of bit of nibble to have with this, you get that lovely balance of those bready qualities. And I think, you don't want anything too much there. In terms of the production, so it's from Alfred Gratien, and they have been a champagne house in production since 1864. They're based right in the heart of Epinay in Champagne, and they've been family owned for over a century and a half before they were then bought and owned by Henkel and Sernlein, which are German sparkling wine specialists you may be familiar with. That buying or that change of ownership has meant that there is more money to carry out some essential repairs, buy some more vineyards and have a bit of modest growth, but it doesn't change the traditional ethos and the know-how with the making of the champagne. So while the ownership has changed and has meant that there's been a bit more in terms of money, which can help with a little bit of modernization, the actual bones of the making has still been in the same family now on the 4th generation within the cellar masters. So that is the Chez family. It's now on the 4th generation, Nicholas, and it's been in the same family since 1905. He joined his father, Jean-Pierre, in 1990 and took over the cellar master role in 2007, although Jean-Pierre was still very much on the scene to sort of lend a word of wisdom in terms of the production of this champagne. The vineyards that Gratien have are a mix of Grand Cru and Premier Cru villages that they own themselves. They've got about 1.56 hectares of vineyards in the Côte de Blanc, but they have such a good reputation with their growers and just the community that they are producing the wine in, that they also have their pick of other Grand Cru and Premier Cru villages that can top up the grapes required to make their cuvées. Alfred Gratien compared his champagnes to haute couture, which I think is very telling when you're trying it. But he also said that the art of wine takes root in the soil. So their priority really is on sourcing the best grapes for the wine, because a finished sparkling wine is only as good as your first kind of ingredients that you're putting in. It's a style of wine that can show faults quite easily. They can come across really pronounced in a wine. So you have to start with a very healthy, good first still wine for your first fermentation. So that is really their focus. And then that craftsmanship on making this really lovely, long finish, full flavored, delicious dry champagne. Anna, what do you think of bread?
I love it. So members, one thing that I find interesting about this, Catherine mentioned that it's barrel fermented, and that it really is quite rare in Champagne. And the main other house that do it, that is sort of comparable, I think Krug do it. I think Krug barrel age their wines before the secondary fermentation, or barrel ferment, I should say. So that kind of gives you an idea of somewhere to pitch it if you've never tried this wine before. I think Krug would be a fair comparison. They have very similar richness. The fact that this is using the red grapes and the white grapes does give some of that richness as well. I think it's the sort we talked about it going with the bread. It's a lovely aperitif wine, but it really is an amazing food wine. And I think I completely wholeheartedly agree with you, Catherine. Something like a really lovely bread with a good quality butter is actually just the perfect thing you need for a top-end champagne. You don't need any more fuss than that. It would go with lots of other foods as well. It would certainly, I'm keen to have it with the prawns, as many of you may have spotted. I recommended that you bring a glass to enjoy with the prawns in a moment as well. I do think it lends itself to that acidity is more mellow because of that long aging. So unlike, say, a Blanc de Blanc from Chardonnay, which has generally got that really, really racy acid. So I don't think you need to put it with something like an oily smoked salmon. I do think it can go for those more broader, earthy textures. The one thing I have drunk this sounds really naughty, but a mushroom risotto. And it was really fabulous with that kind of creamy umami note. This does have a bit more of that development, those tertiary characters. So yeah, I would highly recommend it, members, with a mushroom risotto, should you wish to try it with something else.
Absolutely. The thing as well that I like the most about this is because it hasn't gone through the malolactic fermentation, so that it doesn't have an overly creamy texture or flavor to it, which for me means that I can really go hard with the butter, because you're not having that it's not then an overpowering of creamy buttery notes. And I mean, members, I like to have my butter basically in slices on the bread, and so it works really nicely. I think sometimes if you have one that's a bit too creamy, for me it's too much of a creamy quality, but this is just perfect.
Oh, the dream. What a way to kick off the evening, Catherine.
Absolutely.
Well, after my own heart with Alpha Grecian champagne. It's also worth, I guess, saying that they do produce other wines. Obviously, this is our own label. They have their own wines. They have vintage wines. They even do a demi-sec suite, don't they, Catherine? So
they do, yes.
They do all sorts of things. So it's if you enjoy this style of wine, you enjoy the Society's own label, obviously, please keep buying that. But do explore some of the other wines of Alpha Grecian, because they're absolutely fantastic. Ken and Andrew have said, as they would say, do you want some bread with your butter?
I mean, I do often sometimes think bread is just the vehicle to be getting butter. You can't just eat it with a spoon, so you need something on there.
Fair enough. But I have to say that was a really, really lovely bread as well. It had some great earthy notes, nice texture to it. I'm always a bit dubious about reheating bread, but time and time again, a sprinkle of water, the classic trick, and yeah, it came out very well. So members, pardon me, I'm conscious of time because those of you with your tartlets in, if you haven't already got them out, will need to get them out now. So I will stay on the chat, but we're going to put the hold slide up now to allow you to finish off your tartlets, your salad, and we'll rejoin here at 20 past. I will. Did I get that right? I think so.
Mm-hmm.
So we just need 5 minutes before we rejoin. What I would say as well, members, is my salad came pre-prepared. It didn't when I first did it last time. So if you're suddenly saying, well, I don't need to combine these ingredients, it looks like Dispatch have made it even easier for us. So there's one less step to do with the combining. But if you complete parts 5 to 7 on the tartlet instructions, please do pour the rosé as well. I'm going to go get mine out the fridge. And I do encourage you to top up the champagne because it's really interesting to try it with the prawns alongside the rosé as well. So we'll see you in 5, members. And yes, happy cooking. Hello, members. Welcome back. Hopefully, you're all starting to gather now. I'll just give everyone 30 seconds. Ah, Catherine, you've got the Coravan out. Very wise.
I didn't think it was wise to open all the bottles on one evening, so I'm going with the Coravan. I hope everyone else is feeling that it's a little bit MasterChef vibes this evening. It's a bit of running about, or maybe a bit more ready, steady, cook.
Yeah, ready, steady, cook, I think. I have to say, of lots of these that we've done, members, the main course for this, I think, is the easiest of all of the food meal kits we've done. So thank goodness we can take a break and cook the entire main course from start to finish in the 20 minutes slot that we have midway through. So don't worry if you're thinking, I've not got anything in the oven right now. You're correct. That's the way we should be. Now, in the interest of, I would like to get tasting. So I'm going to do this back to front because this is warm and I want people to enjoy it. So in the interests of tasting, I'm going to talk about the flavors and the pairing. And then as you're eating, I'm going to talk about the wine, which is not really normally the way I would do it, but I think it's important. But I will tell you where this place is, Côte des Verges. It's an appellation in central France. So it's to the north of the Languedoc-Roussillon, but to the west of Rhône. I've heard it described as the belly button of France, which I think is one of the strangest things I've ever heard. But it's a very, very interesting place to make wine. It sits on volcanic soils, basalt salt in particular. And it is quite mountainous with very cold winters. And those cold winters help retain the acidity that is crucial, I think. The cold weather, sorry, not cold winters, but the mountains, the mitigating factors. The acidity in this wine is crucial for the pairing to cut through that rich thermidor sauce. It's obtained AOC level in 2010, so it's relatively new. And this particular sub-appellation, Coron, is famous for these dry, full-flavoured onion skin style rosés that go really, really well with food. So this wine in particular is 30% Pinot Noir and 70% Gamay. That's very common for the appellation. In terms of flavours, why a rosé? It was really tricky when I paired this dish because you've got really very rich, sweet flavours almost from the tart. The prawns are sweet in themselves. The sauce is quite rich and sweet. So I originally tried, funnily enough, white Burgundies, which we've got with the next course. I tried a few other kind of richer wines, some Chenin. And the problem I had was the richer the white wines got, they then didn't pair with the green salad. And so it became this real big challenge for me. And actually, funnily enough, Catherine and I always say it, rosé it's the one size fits all. It can do a bit of everything. And I see it in spades here because this has some tartness. So it's almost got like grapefruit and leafy aromas to it, and that for me is what's working with the green parts of the dish, i.e. the asparagus, etc. The acid I've already mentioned cuts through the sauce, but that kind of sweet candied note almost is what I think goes with the prawn tartlet. Prawns and rosé is, to be honest, a bit of a favorite combination of mine. Sweet red fruits, fleshy juicy prawns. I think that's really important. Even though it looks very pale, this is not a wimpy wine, and that beautiful orange color is quite classic of Pinot Noir and Gamay rosés. That's sort of slightly more, I think onion skin is a perfect description actually. The other thing I have is a slight hint of smoke, and that is quite common in the volcanic wines. So wines such as Mount Etna wines, they tend to have this kind of, I hate to say minerality, we talk about it all the time, no one knows what it means, but this kind of smoky, stony character, which I think is really evident in here, and that is something that often gets attributed to volcanic soils, so in this case, basalt. So let me know what you think of the pairing. It was a bit quirky, but honestly, I probably tried 7 or 8 white wines that I just couldn't make work. I think some things worked with the green, some things worked with the prawns, but nothing could work with both parts of the dish. So I ended up with a rosé, which manages to do a lot of the jobs of a white wine, but has the richness and the sweet texture that goes with the prawns as well. So before I talk about the actual wine itself, Catherine, what do you think?
I mean, I love a rosé and turn to a rosé if I'm ever stuck on a tricky food pairing. But this one is delicious, and you're right. It can be quite easy to look at it and think it's not going to pack much of a punch, but it really does, and it does have those balancing qualities of going really nicely with the sweetness. I was surprised a little bit about how sweet the crust is of the tart, but then you've got that lovely slight almost a little, I don't know if there's a bit of spice in the sort of thermidor sauce, maybe a little nutmeg sort of taste. Yeah,
and I think there's mustard.
That kind of florally aromatic-y savory spice, but then you've also got the lovely greenness, and asparagus can be really tricky, a contender to pair things with. Stella and Tim just said like marzipan. Yeah, it does have that marzipan-y flavor, doesn't it? So you've got a lot going on what looks like quite a simple amount of flavors, but there is a lot to contend with, and the greenness of the salad with that little herbal greenness and savory quality of the wine. It's a really beautiful pairing. I think it's really well done, Emma.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you're right to call this wine savory, if I'm honest. I definitely get those kind of, I don't want to say vegetal, that makes it sound awful, but there is this kind of, it has got savory, and not as far as umami, but certainly a salty character to it, which I think is friendly when you're pairing. It's less of a quaffing by the swimming pool rosé for me. So I'll tell you a little bit about the producer, and it's quite a lovely story actually. It's a cooperative called Cave Saint-Vernet. I want to show you. Oh, I'll get up the screen. Pardon me. So Cave Saint-Vernet, and it's actually a cooperative, and it was founded in the 1950s, and there are 86 members, and they each have very, very small parcels. That can sometimes be an unbelievable challenge, but actually here they all work very collaboratively together. They make a huge range of wines. We don't buy all of them. There are loads. But what's nice about having 86 small parcels is that all of them are hand harvested almost, because it's not a huge amount of work. It might be a family operated. So there's a huge attention to detail. I wish I could say the same for all co-ops in France, and sometimes unfortunately that's just not true. Here you have lots of members, a scary number of members, but probably all almost all harvesting by hand. The sad thing about such cooperative is that they're usually not the best money-making enterprises. So in the 1980s, they actually nearly closed, which would have been a real shame, having already operated for 30 years. But they were rescued by an investment in 1991, and they had this cash injection, and it allowed them to modernize. And they modernized in 1993 by installing a series of temperature-controlled tanks. And that sounds very boring, but it is crucial when producing rosé in particular. If you can't temperature control your tanks, then you get all sorts of weird and wonderful things and flavors coming out during your fermentation. And actually, members who join me on my rosé session will know that actually rosé has only really had the leaps and bounds of the past, let's say the trends of the past 10 years are to thank because of the technology from the 1990s. So things like better pressing and temperature control were two of the really key things that allow you to make a beautiful wine this color, but with this amount of flavor. And funnily enough, I was talking to a winemaker yesterday from South Africa, actually, but we were talking about rosé production. And he said, good quality rosé, that seems like the most simple wine, is the hardest technical wine to get right. So without that modernization in the early 1990s, we probably wouldn't have any of these sorts of wines that we're drinking today. They've had the same winemaker since 1999, a gentleman called Olivier Mignat, and he's been fundamental in reducing the yields. So what I mean by that is he's gone around all of the 86 members and he said, hey, don't grow too much, don't grow too much fruit because the quality isn't as good. You need to reduce your yields, so reduce the amount of fruit that you have per vine. And in reducing the number of bunches, or the amount of fruit, you will increase the quality, because the vine will concentrate its efforts into producing better fruit in smaller quantities. So he's been absolutely instrumental in doing that. And it's not an easy job. I mentioned there are 86 members. There are actually 180 hectares over the whole of the co-op. And I've just seen about the champagne. Yes, Catherine, do try it with the tartlets. In fact, I'll finish up quickly here and then we'll talk champagne and tartlets as well. But there are 180 hectares, and that's nearly half the total of the whole region. So effectively the co-op is the biggest, by far the biggest producer in the whole region. They dominate the region and they're the only co-op. Gamay is the most planted. Here we've got the Pinot Noir and Gamay blend. Gamay is the most planted. It's about half the vines of the co-op, then Pinot Noir, and then a little Chardonnay. And mostly they produce red, but actually 25% is now going to rosé. And the rosés here do have lots of character. So I think really the only way is up for the rosés here. I have not tried the champagne with the tartlets yet. What did you think, Catherine?
It was lovely, but the rosé pips it for me. I think because of the longer aging and the richness of the champagne, it overpowers slightly for me the more delicate sweetness of the tartlet. Where I think the rosé is in a bit more of a nice sort of marriage between the flavors. But you know, if I only had the champagne to hand, I would perfectly enjoy it with the tartlets as well. But for me, it would be the rosé that would pip it. Members, if you've been able to try both of them with the tartlets, do let us know what you think as well. But Anna,
I'd love to.
What do you think?
I think, I mean, champagne and fish, or champagne and seafood for me is such an obvious choice. But as you said, Catherine, it's that sweetness in the tartlet that is the challenge. Although this rosé is dry, that fruit flavor does manage to carry it, in my opinion, through. Whereas very, very dry wines, that sweetness of the tart will only make the dry wines more austere. So luckily, I don't think it quite does that with champagne. But for example, I've got a dry Italian white wine open downstairs, a Cortese. I would not have dreamt of putting that with something like this, because it's already quite a angular, high acid, very sort of citrus fruit driven wine. And I think, unfortunately, with these flavor combinations, it would almost lose some of the fruit, and then you've just kind of got a high acid, bland, neutral wine. So I think it was important to pair it with something a bit more complex. And I know it's a bit of a strange thing to say rosé is complex, but this really is.
Yeah, I agree. Let's not let's move on from rosé being thought of as a wimpy, wishy-washy thing, which I think generally people are taking it into more consideration. And I think as well with our food and wine events, we're always trying to get a rosé in there if we can. So the more options there are, you've got a bit of rosé for every sort of food that you're wanting to pair with.
Absolutely. I think also for me, what's quite interesting is, I mean, members, if you've bought this wine, please do let me know what you think, but it's almost white wine in terms of color. It's so pale. But because of the grape varieties, because of this low yield that I talked about reducing the amount of crop on the vines, the concentration of the fruit that must have gone into this to extract this low level of color for members who are less familiar with how rosé is made, you almost make a soup, a wine soup. So you crush the berries, and the only color of any grape, almost any grape, is in the skins. Most grapes, 96% of grapes have a clear center. So when you produce white wines, that's why you can make Pinot, you can use red grapes in champagne. When you're making a white wine, you get rid of those skins straight away and you just leave the juice. With a rosé, you allow some of those skins time in contact like brewing a tea. So if you imagine it like brewing a tea, and the shorter amount of time, the lighter the color. But a lot of other things in the skins are things like polyphenols, anthocyanins. You get lots of flavor compounds in the epidermis just underneath the skin. So a lot of the really, really pale wines can be pale for pale's sake and don't really taste like very much, because they've effectively just got rid of the really good bits. Whereas here, I think it's fascinating because they've managed to extract, they must have done it so gently, not moved the juice around too much and just allowed for the extraction of the flavors, but not quite the colors. So yeah. Were you looking for the maceration time?
I was seeing if it had it.
I cannot find it anywhere. So members, that's the amount of time that the skin stays in contact with the juice. It's called maceration time in rosé production. I could not find it anywhere. If I was to hazard a guess, a few hours.
Yeah, to be that pale,
yeah,
to get color but still be that pale, must have only been a few hours.
I agree. So members, we're luckily running on time. If you have any questions, please do remember to pop them into the Q&A, because Catherine and I would love to answer them as we go, particularly if you've got any ideas, any thoughts. Have you had something else this evening? That would be great to know. Or are you trying another food with the wines? Please do let us know. But get your questions in, use the Q&A. We will be hanging around again on the chat. I've got husband downstairs helping me cook tonight. Catherine's going to rush back to her MasterChef moment in the kitchen. So I'll be around to answer any questions, but please do pop them in because we'd love to talk them through. Catherine and I could talk food and wine pairings all night. So in the interests of us being ahead of schedule, which is wonderful, I will allow you to finish off your tartlets if you haven't already. And then the next part of the session, we're going to rejoin in 20 minutes. If it's just before 8, great. We will carry, I'll tell you what, I will join at 5 to 8. Catherine, if you can do the same, we'll have a little chat, but we'll start the food and wine chat again at 8 o'clock. Remember, when you're cooking the main course, I have suggested not to include all of the cheese mix in your potatoes. The only reason I say that is it's very, very cheesy. But it's personal preference. If you like it very cheesy, that's fine. Catherine, what are you going to do? Full cheese?
I might go full cheese because I love it very cheesy. But if I'm able to, I might do some and spoon it out and then add the rest of the cheese and have a bit of a comparison. I'm really going to stretch myself in doing 2 lots of
pom, double pom. But please do also pour the white, obviously, and I would encourage you, maybe, do you think, Catherine, pour the white just a little bit before and allow a little bit more?
I would pour the white and then crack on with your food. So the white has got a little bit of time to come up a little bit more to temperature before you enjoy it, just to let the flavors come out there.
Perfect. And then if you do want to pour another rosé from the fridge, we actually actively encourage you, because again, it's quite fun to do a side-by-side comparison with the main course. So white and rosé, and cooking and optional levels of cheese in the pom. Thank you all, and we'll see you at just before 8 o'clock. I am back, members. If anyone's got any questions or thoughts, we will kick back off at 8. But if you do have any questions, please let us know. Hello, Catherine.
Hello.
We had a rather entertaining whoopsie-daisy, we realised, with a 6 looking like a 9.
Oh no.
We've worked past it.
Well, I feel that little part of the prep was a little bit more supermarket sweep than ready, steady, cook. I did end up throwing a bit of the beurre blanc over the hob. So members, if you are also being a bit haphazard in the kitchen, don't worry this evening, you are not alone.
We'll just wait a couple of minutes before we start so that everyone can get back to us, perhaps with a little bit less beurre blanc over the kitchen.
I've left the hob on. I'm just going to turn it off.
Very good idea, Catherine. These are very entertaining sessions. Paul Gascoigne says that they are drinking domain of, and then I think was about to type the, but it doesn't seem to have worked. And it's nice to see some people joining from near where I grew up. So someone from Chalfont St. Peter and another person from, I think it was Cookham. Yeah, from Cookham, which is great. So nice to have some Bucks and Berks counties represented. I'm on the other side of London now, so I'm, well, not really, still north, but I'm now in Essex. But very nice to see those people. All safe now, Catherine?
Yes, crisis averted.
Good. We can't have you burning the house down.
No, I mean, I don't know about you, but it's been so warm lately. I've barely been using the oven. It's been very much compiling, fridge dinners, and then it started raining here. So I'm in Hertfordshire. It started raining this evening, so it's time for the oven to go back on, but you have to remember to turn it back off.
You sure do. Well, members, I've been having Wi-Fi crisis. Well, no, that's not true. I've had 2 power cuts today, which has been extraordinary. So I did say to Catherine I was a bit worried about the Wi-Fi today, but fingers crossed and touch wood, we've not had any more. But if I do disappear, that is why. I've got a backup laptop connected to my phone ready to go. But if I do at any point over the next half an hour, 40 minutes, disappear, then yes, it's that's why. Paul says, apologies, we are drinking Domain of the Bee rosé, which has worked very well. We're ahead, and the dessert was more liquid than I was expecting. I've had another member say their dessert was quite liquidy. I'm going to bring it up with Dishbatch on Monday. It looks like I could be wrong, but it looks like they might have been jiggled around in transit. So yeah, please do let me know if you've got the same problem. I think unfortunately they look like they've potentially broken up a bit, but I'm no chef, so I'm going to speak to them on Monday about that. Now, Catherine, I think we can kick off. It is 8 o'clock. I'm excited, even though I've got the wrong salad with the right dressing. So I will hand over to you to talk about our white wine.
Lovely. So yes, let's talk about the wine first, and then we'll talk about why it works as a pairing, why we think it works as a pairing. And obviously, as we've said, if you're tasting along and you think it works and you'd like to make any comments about what you think, do let us know. Equally, if it's not quite hitting the spot for you, also let us know, because that's the joy of these things. We like to expand our palates, and everyone else has a different palate to each other, so it's also subjective, but we think it works. But let me tell you about the wine to start with. So this is the Maison Roche de Vilaine Saint-Aubin 2018. Now, Saint-Sabin is in the Côte de Beaune in Burgundy. And the little fun fact to kick off is that the city of Beaune was actually known as Belen in the Middle Ages, and it's actually a Celtic name, which is where the name of this the producer comes from. So it's the Roche de Belen. It is Nicolas Patel who is the winemaker here, and he chose the name of Belen, the extraction from Beaune, in reference to the city and the historical links to great wines, and that it's a area that's famous for the diversity of the terroir and really renowned for Burgundian wine. So Maison Roche de Belen, as it is now, came about in 2008. It's a wine trading company as well as a producer. It's right in the heart of Côte de Beaune. They've got some really lovely modern air-conned, which I feel like I need right now after running in and out of the kitchen, air-conned buildings that include the vatting room. They've got 2 cellars, one for red, one for white, as well as warehouses, storage, labelling, shipping. So they really are quite, a modern operation at the moment. It started in terms of Nicolas's wine background with his parents, as often it does, and that was Francois and Gerard, and they arrived in Vonnet in 1964. And Gerard was an agronomist and a winemaker, and he was really focused on producing really high quality wines, and the estate developed over time and became really well known and renowned in Burgundy. So then when Nicolas took over and it went through that slight rebrand or rechange, he really wanted to retain that sort of that history and that established quality level and recognition, but just add a little bit more modernization and a bit more of a updating to keep with the times for the winemaking. But it is still the wines themselves are very recognizable as Burgundian, but they also have some slight influences from Nicolas's experience around the world. So before he came back to Burgundy, he spent some time in Margaret River in Australia, in the Russian River Valley in California, as well as other regions in France. And before coming back to the sort of the family fold in 1997, he was last in Western Australia at the Lewin Estate, which are really, they're really specialists in Chardonnay. And this is 100% Chardonnay wine. So he has taken some of his experience and knowledge gleaned from other wine producing regions in different styles to Burgundy, but been able to bring those to the forefront and retain that traditional style, but with a little bit of a bit of interest and difference from around the world. So it is quite a ripe and concentrated Chardonnay. It's, for me, it is a more it's not too leaning towards the sort of Southern Hemispherian style, but it has a bit more of that influence than other Burgundies white Burgundies that you would get. It's not as austere for me. It's got a bit more richness and a bit more depth and concentration and complexity, which is why I think it's a really great pairing with this. It's the 2018 vintage. So 2018 as a year was a little bit tricky at the start. So going into spring and early summer, they had some rain, some climatic challenges that weren't that great, but then it really came through with that really lovely heat wave in the summer, basically. So you had that lovely concentrated amount of warmth and sun, so the grapes could get really ripe. The picking was done in September, so it had a little bit more of a lengthening in the harvest time and the growing time before they harvested. So they really had some great concentration and really let the grapes get their optimum ripeness and quality. It then meant that they had a really healthy yield of good maturity, and everything was picked by hand just to make sure that they were getting all the grapes that were of the top-notch quality, because it was a very hot summer, if you remember back to 2018. So there, in some instances, and I imagine in some bunches, there could have been a little bit of sunburn on some of those grapes. So the hand harvesting means that they can really pick out what is best to go into the wines. Now, although it was quite warm, the nice thing about where their vineyards are and where the Côte de Beaune is it's in a valley. So there are some lovely mitigating qualities as well. So they have an elevation of 270 meters. So that means that they are getting the ripening in the day, but the higher elevation means there's that little bit of cooling influence as well. They're on clay and limestone soils. So although those are really great for drainage in those very kind of wet years, which meant that the rain at the beginning of the year wouldn't stay too waterlogged and really give the Chardonnay really wet feet, which it doesn't like, and that can be quite a bad impact. It also meant that when it got into that really hot weather, it had a lovely retention of moisture so that the growing could continue as expected. They have 90 hectares of vineyards, and they're on a easterly, southeasterly aspect. So again, it's that lovely warmth that is coming through for a very long period in the growing season right up to harvest. And then being in the valley does mean that they get some lovely breezes from the north, so that they can have a little bit of a cooling effect as well. So it doesn't get too hot. So it was a really great vintage for this wine to be produced, and hopefully you can taste that in the really lovely ripe yellow fruits in there. There is a little bit of citrus still. There's some lovely oaky texture notes, so it does have a little bit of oak in that it has some time in barrel without being overly empowered. It's 10% new oak, so there's enough to give you a lovely little bit of that oaky texture and flavor, that lovely toasty brioche note, but not so much that it's overpowering. And then it also then does go through 100% malolactic fermentation. So this one, in comparison to the Chardonnay, hopefully if you still have a bit of Chardonnay in a glass, you can go back and almost compare how the acid is coming across. This still has some lovely fresh acidity, but it is that bit creamier as well. So this one is softer. The acids aren't as zippy. It's a lovely lactic-y acid, like a really like a yogurt, like that zippy, tingly quality of the acids in a yogurt. I think that's why it goes so well with the cheese and the beurre blanc, because those are really quite potent flavors within this dish. The cod as a white fish always lends itself really nicely to that lovely, creamy, almost a little bit smoky from some of the cheese. I don't know exactly what cheese it is, Anna. I don't know if you would be able to confirm or deny, but it's a lovely savory, salty cheese with, I think, a little bit of I think there's a little bit of a smoky quality to it. So it really works nicely with the fact that this has gone through a full mallow. I also think what's really nice about the dish, because I don't know about you, Anna, but the little bits of roe, the salmon roe in the beurre blanc, because they're those little pops of salinity, they really do add a different complexity to it. And I think when you get a bit of that, I don't know, members, if you want to just try maybe 3 or 4 on your fork and then have a sip of the wine, because you've got that lovely salty hit, it really brings out the bright fruit in the wine. It really makes that come to the foreground for me. So I think it's another really lovely pairing. And I did try it just before I came back on camera with the rosé that we had just tried, and in this instance I definitely would be going with the Chardonnay. So although rosé is a bit of everything food pairing, this Chardonnay works so well, even with the leeks, the sweetness of the leeks, that they've really sort of melted in. And because they're little baby leeks, they don't have too much of that it's like astringency that you can kind of get with other alliums, you know, like your shallots and things that have that slight bitterness to them. It's all lovely and sweet and creamy and mellow, and this is just working really well for me. Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I've actually just tried the rosé now. The thing that made the markedly different between the two dishes, and where the rosé has completely changed for me, is that that sweetness of the prawn dish meant that the rosé kind of was smokier, and we talked about that kind of vegetal but not quite vegetal and herbaceous stuff. With this dish, because it is more salty, because you've got that roe, because you've got, just genuinely more salt, the wine tastes much fruitier. So the rosé was really, really, really fruity. It tasted like a completely different wine. So I agree with you. I much prefer the Chardonnay. I think the Chardonnay has, I'm guessing here, Catherine, and you might not know the fact itself, but it tastes to me a bit like it's had some lees stirring, some batonnage.
I think it has. I don't have like an exact amount, but it's had some time on those lees, and you can feel that in the texture of the wine as well.
And it's got that slightly salty, but not, more like a rye bread smell to it. And I often find that kind of marmitey, right? We talked about Marmite the other day, didn't we? Yeast extract.
Yes.
It's got that yeast extract smell to it, which, if I'm really honest, I do believe that all good Chardonnay should have.
It's that slight, I don't know if you've like a sourdough starter, that all that really lovely fresh baker's yeast that's really,
yeah.
Really,
and I'm getting that in here. And that saltiness, I think, is really helpful with this dish as well. I had no idea he'd worked in so many Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere, actually, in California and Australia. So interesting you say that, because I am getting these kind of, the fruit is very, very, very ripe. But 2018 was a good year for volume and value, I think, in terms of crop was good. There was lots of it. So long as you didn't get sunburn, everyone was in for a bit of a good one in 18. So yeah, I think it's great. Beautiful pairing. Just also, there's something about a white Burgundy and creamy fish that just makes me think of treats. It's an indulgent tea, this one.
Absolutely. It's very comforting, isn't it? It's that lovely unctuousy, full flavored, and with the cheese and the beurre blanc, it's a lot of things that, we're coming back to texture again in a slightly different variation, but there's a lot of mouthfeel with this, the dish. And I think you need that balance of mouthfeel with the wine as well. So you've got that lovely texture from a bit of lees, you've got the lovely bit of oak on there, and the acids are really softened out, and it's just working beautifully.
I think I couldn't agree more in terms of the mouthfeel. I think if you were to try and pair this with, even a Chablis, or, very, very light styles of wine, unoaked, your Sauvignon Blancs, your Grüne Veltliners, your unoaked Assyrticos, all of those sorts of styles of wine, I think the dish is too rich and indulgent. And as much as it would, as much as it sounds like, oh yes, but you could have a high acid wine to cut through the dish, I think it needs sort of power matched with power here. And I think that's what's making it work for me, that kind of full fatty richness, but dare I say it, both not feeling out of context on a warm, mild summer evening either.
No, well, I was going to say as well, I was curious as to how it would work with the salad, particularly it being a bitter leaf salad, because that can be quite a potent flavor against a wine. But I think because you've got that savory quality to it, again, it's working nicely, because the bitterness of the leaves do bring out that savory, slight flinty, and that yeasty quality. So it doesn't taste too out of kilter. It's not disjointed. You're not getting a really bitter dish that then makes the wine taste overly bitter and dry and unpalatable. It's great. I mean, it might also be because my beurre blanc has spread to the entire plate, so I'm getting that in the leaves as well. But yeah, it's really, really nice.
Yeah, I have to say beurre blanc is one of my favorite sauces. And this in particular with the herbs and those roux. I think the roux might be my favorite part of the dish. And I never ever cook with roux, so it's just encouraging me to do it more, to put it in because you can buy pots of roux pretty easily, can't you?
Yeah.
You just pop them in a sauce. Sounds delicious.
They're great. Just such a great little seasoning to it. It just adds that little bit of something else that, really lifts it.
Reminds me of bubble tea, though. Have you tried a bubble tea?
Yes, so that tapioca-y taste.
I can't say I'm the biggest fan of bubble tea, but I like some roux in my sauce, but I don't like my tea to pop in quite the same way. It's a bit disconcerting. Members, again, please do let us know if you've got any questions. Let us know what you're thinking, what you thought of the pairings. We are running 3 minutes ahead of schedule, which is delightful. It's just lovely that we keep coming back on time, Catherine, and I know we're rushing to cook the food, but I think actually we're now on what is unbelievably the home stretch because there's no more cooking involved. So oven is off.
Yes, kettle is prepped.
Kettle is prepped, oven is off. And in the interests of having to boil the kettle, we should probably go now, and then everyone can rejoin us. And let me just get the screen up.
Just before we do, Anna, just for one minute or so, my potato experiment.
The cheese experiment.
I should have just gone with your suggestion because the less cheesy dollop is that bit nicer with the Chardonnay. I think that the amount of cheese that then I've gone into the second dollop, because there's so much in there, it adds that really kind of bouncy, stringy texture to the dish. And it's not the flavor as much that I'm finding tricky with the wine, it's the consistency of the food.
And the colder it gets, that's only going to get worse, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And for that, if you're having something that cheesy, I'd want something much fresher and zippier to be a real sort of cut through on that. So I think yes, a very informed choice of slightly less slightly less cheese in the potato.
I think you're completely right. If you were going to have just pure cheesy potato, you would pick something with a much higher acid, like a Chenin or something like that, to really cut through the cheesy potato vibes. I think it was just a tiny bit too much when I first tried it. So as much as I love a cheesy potato. So members, if you could all rejoin in 7 minutes. It's time to prep the dessert and to pour the final wine, which is the Gewürztraminer Vendage Tardive from the Famille Hugel 2012. You'll notice that we haven't put the little Petit Four gummy on here. You're welcome to bring that with you to taste that as well. Nana Collins says, guys, we loved the cheesy potatoes. Okay, good. It's not that I didn't love them. It was more a wine thing than a not loving the cheesy potatoes. But I'm glad. I'm very glad. But yes, if you can come back for 25 past, having done that, and please do feel free to bring the little gummy with you if you wish. It should sort of go with the dessert wine choice, but you don't have to. I'm going to enjoy mine on the sofa later as a little treat. But I am going to go get my dessert and my Gewürztraminer. So we'll see you shortly. Hello members, welcome back. I too have a rather liquidy creme caramel, as does Liz. Ken and Andrea have said we're approaching it like a non-crispy creme brulee, which actually I wish I'd done. I wish I'd been dunking my palmia into my delicious sort of bowl of caramelly goodness. But I went for the pour technique, so it's poured over the top. But yeah, I could have gone for a dunk. Very good idea, Ken and Andrea. So we've not quite got Catherine back yet, but hopefully we are getting the rest of you in now. Here she is. Are you going for the dunk or the pour, Catherine?
I'm treating mine a little bit like a dessert soup.
Nice, lovely. So you've gone for Ken and Andrea's non-crispy creme brulee technique.
Yes, or like a slightly lumpy custard, which I'm very much here for. I love a custard, and the palmiers, I mean, it all tastes delicious, even if it doesn't look quite as you'd expect for a creme brulee, but the flavour is still great.
Yeah, it doesn't look how I envisaged it, but I'm still okay with it. So I've actually used the Coravin for this, Catherine, in particular, because this wine that I paired here is really the textbook of its style. So I'll just show you up here before I go into the details. But in terms of sort of MW studies, it doesn't really get much better than the Hugel families of Gewürztraminer, Vendange Tardive. So that's why I've Coravin that one. I do hope I'll make my way through the other two wines this evening and tomorrow, so I'll be fine. But yes, so it really is it's a best in class wine. There's no two ways about it. It's from Alsace, which is sure many members may have gone on holiday there or know about it, visited it, but it's in the northeast of France, and it actually hugs the German border. That's a weird way of describing it, but it's up against the German border. So much so that actually it's been under German occupation and owned by Germany and flipped and flopped over the centuries. So it's got a hugely Germanic influence on the winemaking. It is the only region in France where that's actually such a lie. I don't know why I said that. It's the main quality region in France where they actually put the grape variety on the label. That's a very German thing to do. In France, they like to confuse you and they call it Saint-Aubin, and you're expected to know it's Chardonnay. Whereas in Alsace, they write the grape variety. You may as well notice it's spelled slightly differently to the German version, which has an umlaut, but they do use Germanic varieties. So you find Riesling, you find Gewürztraminer, you find Pinot Noir, which the Germans call Spätburgunder, but in a very more German style rather than a Burgundian style. So it's hugely influenced by Germany, even down to the shape of the flute. The bottle here, that is a German bottle shape. So it has really got its own identity. But since we're doing a food and wine pairing evening, it's worth saying as well that Alsace has more Michelin star restaurants per square. I think it's per square mile. I don't think it's per capita. I think it's actually its surface has more Michelin star restaurants than any other part of France. And it really is considered the heart of gastronomy. That's not why I chose it. And I just want to tell you a little bit about how challenging this pairing was before I go into the wine itself. I tried, naturally, it's a French wine tasting. We've got a delicious French pudding. So I immediately got myself a Sauterne, a Montbazillac. I got a couple of other little bits and pieces like a Jurançon. And I had also ordered this for training purposes, not for tasting. So I knew I had it on my wine rack. And I tried these Sauternes and these Barsacs, and I thought, there's almost a bit too much sugar in those wines. And the Sauternes Sauterne wine can be so intense. And I was trying it and it was just overshowering this. I mean, the pastry here is so light, so delicate. The flavors of the actual pudding itself are not overpowering. You know, we haven't got loads of candied fruits, and there's almost a slightly aromatic touch to the pudding as well. So here there's more floral aromas, there's more roses and jasmine. And I felt that went with the delicacy of the dessert. And then also that, because it's older, it's also developed this honeyed nature and almost this cooked, slightly burnt sugar nature. And that for me was just spot on with the caramel, that burnt sugar. And then Gewürztraminer itself is quite oily and fatty. And I think the texture, going back to texture again, we've become obsessed with texture, haven't we, Catherine? But the texture of it, this kind of oily, fatty, rich, unctuous texture is really in harmony with the texture of the dessert too. So all of that, and then you get this beautiful, slightly nutty thing, which you wouldn't get if the wine was younger. And I think that's important to say. You could have Vendange Tardif Gewürztraminer that's very, very young and doesn't have that kind of slightly more nutty note. So anyway, I pulled this off my rack. I tasted it before it was even chilled. I had the dessert on my plate and nothing was working. And I pulled it off my rack and I tried it. And I thought, that's it. That's the one. I was a surprise. So I hope members you enjoy the pairing. It wasn't on my to-do list. It wasn't expected, but here we are. So I'll tell you a little bit about the wine itself. Vendange Tardif means late harvest, and the style was actually pioneered by the Hugo family. So they are, or were, and continue to be instrumental in all of the rules and regulations around Vendange Tardif. It's essentially you late harvest, so you allow the grapes to concentrate on the vine, and then they get a little bit of botrytis as well. Botrytis being the same thing that happens in Sauternes, Barsac, sometimes Montbazillac, where the grapes get infected, I should say. It's not the nicest term. We were talking about this just a few days ago, Catherine, but the grapes get infected. A rot called Botrytis cinerea takes over the grapes and they get pierced, they dehydrate, and not only do they lose water and therefore concentrate the flavors, but they also get some sort of more honeyed notes and things like sometimes some spiced ginger, etc., added to the wine. Now, Vendange Tardif is quite interesting because you actually have to give the INAO, who are the body that look after appellations, you actually have to declare before your harvest. So I'm not sure of the date, but it must be June, July, whether you think you're going to make a Vendange Tardif wine. And they don't make this every year. You need really, really good conditions. So I'm guessing probably, maybe about veraison, when the grapes start to change color, which is when they're getting to their optimum development stage. You need to make the call and you need to say, have we got enough concentration? Have we got enough quality fruit? Because much like champagne, where Catherine was talking earlier about champagne not really being able to hide faults, botrytized wine, my goodness, if the grapes aren't good quality, that rot is just going to exaggerate bad quality grapes. So you need to know, right, I'm in for this. Let's do it. Let's declare to the INAO we want to make a Vendange Tardif and get the permission to do so. So this wine is from Hugel, and it comes from the heart of their Grand Cru vineyard, Sporren, or one of their Grand Cru vineyards, of a clay marl soil. Vines are not that old, so, well, not that old. Their average age is about 35 years. Yields very, very low, so 28 hectolitres per hectare, which is important, but Grand Cru vineyards in Alsace automatically have a lower yield anyway. They obviously declared they wanted to harvest this style of wine. Harvest began at the end of September, and they had to select everything by hand, selecting all the best fruit. And then interestingly, what they do with this wine is they harvest it at, this sounds strange because it never quite works out like this, but they harvest it at a potential alcohol at 16%. So if you let all of that sugar ferment, you would get a 16% alcohol wine, right? But it takes 17 grams of sugar to produce 1% of alcohol. So what they actually do is this wine could have been technically a 16% dry Gewürztraminer, so with no sugar. Would have been very weird because it's already had botrytis and the flavors would have been mental. But instead what they've done is they've actually, it's 10.7% alcohol technically, but 10.9% alcohol here. And it's residual sugar. Oh, it says here the harvest date was the 12th of October. I apologize. I thought it was the last week of September. But the residual sugar is now 99 grams per litre. So that's not as high as the likes of Sauternes, which usually come in at around 130 to 150 grams per litre. So it's not quite got the same level of sugar. And it's also, because of this halted fermentation, it's also got a lower alcohol, so 10.5%. So for me, actually, that makes it a really, really attractive dessert wine, because, you know, you're getting to the end of the meal. It's actually, although it's full of flavour, it's lighter in alcohol, it's lighter in sugar. And I think with a lighter dessert like this, for me, it really, really works. Everything is done beautifully in the wineries. They don't use any pumps. Everything's done by gravity. So they get small tubs, put them into temperature controlled vats, very slow, like light fermentation, settles naturally over the winter. The Hugel family are very big on organics and doing things very sort of well, and not too much intervention is how I would describe it. So, for example, they let all the bits and pieces in the juice, the gross lees, as they're often called, they let the gross lees settle over the winter just to get the clear, lovely juice. And then they really lightly filter it. And then they age it in their cellars. So it's not that the Wine Society's held on to this for 10 years. They have. They don't want you to drink it until it's seen a bit of that development and that age. So, I will be the first to hold my hand up, members, and say that dry Gewürztraminer is not that exciting for me. It tastes like Turkish delight to me, and I find it very hard to pair with. Obviously, everyone always says Asian dishes, and I think, yeah, but there's other things I'd rather drink when I'm having a Thai. And I like Gewürztraminer, but it's never the go-to grab off the shelf wine for me. And I just think this is so stonking. Yeah, I love it. Catherine, what do you think?
I agree. It's a really, like, really, really great one to turn to when things like a Sauternes that don't quite work. And so Derek has said that he's got some of the Sauternes from the other evening when we did the cheese and wine pairing. I also have a little bit left in the fridge, so I'm going to try it afterwards. But I do think, for me already, I think that I will find that the Gewürz was actually the better pairing. And I think you're right, because of the sweetness and the flavour that you're getting from this dessert particularly. There's lots of different types of sweetness in this dessert. There's different flavours of sugar, if that makes sense. Obviously, you've got the palmiers, so you've got that lovely cooked, burnt, caramelized sugar and the flakiness of the pastry, and then you've got the burnt sugar flavour in the creme caramel, but then you've also got the sugars from the milk, from heating the milk, and the dairy sugars, which have that different flavour as well. And then with the vanilla going into that sort of aromatic-y, perfumed flavour, which I'm getting quite a bit of sort of a blossomy, like acacia blossom, and that lychee flavour through, and that's really working really nicely for me. It was interesting what you were saying as well about the sort of the level of sugar as well in comparison to a Sauternes or a Monbazillac or another style of sweet wine. I did do, just to kind of calibrate my palate against, I had a little sip of the Saint-Aubin to sort of get a very dry wine, and then go back to the Gewürz. You obviously, in comparison to the Saint-Aubin, you've got a lot of lovely sweetness there, but it's still not so much more than you would get from, or you would get so much more if you had something like a Sauternes that had that more residual sugar. So I think this has got lovely freshness and a delicacy of the sweetness, and yeah, it's just really, really nice for me.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the kind of fresh vanilla pod in the dessert. I think that's where this marriage came from for me, because although vanilla is a flavour you can get from oak through in a Sauternes, for example, it's not uncommon for a Sauternes to be quite vanilla-y. They've used a lot of new oak. But I think here it's the kind of vanilla with all of those things you were saying, like lychee, some more tropical fruits, but not the kind of dried mango that I normally get from Sauternes. It's a lot fresher.
Yeah.
Which is mad, because it's 10 years old.
Yeah.
It's completely mad. I just can't believe a wine tastes that fresh and that vibrant, and from a great variety I'm not a particular fan of.
Juicy. It tastes
juicy. It
juicy. Does. Like,
yeah.
You know, that lovely, it's almost a little bit like when you've had like tinned fruit and you get that lovely
tinned
syrup. Yeah.
I was just about to say that when you said it. I thought, oh my God, I'm getting tin peaches. That's what it is. It's vanilla custard and tin peaches. There we go. That's why it works for me. Taking me down memory lane. Liz had said that she said, good idea using the dipping technique. She said she doesn't like Gewürztraminer, so she was trying the Society's Côte de Leon Premier Cru Chaume. That's so interesting you say that, Liz. Liz said, I'm not quite sure. I tried Côte de Leon Chaume because it's one of my favorite wines in the world, and I didn't feel like it worked either. Again, there was almost too much concentration. There was too much richness. And I also often find that, not always, but apple, so it's made with Chenin. If you're not familiar with it, it's a beautiful, beautiful Chenin Blanc sweet wine from the Loire Valley. And it is my sweet wine of the moment. I'll put my hands up and say I'm addicted completely to it. But I often find that apple and custard-based desserts are not my favorite. And I don't know what it is, because apples and custard are really, really lovely. But I just do sometimes feel like there's better wines to go with custardy desserts. Not always, there's always a reason, and custard and cinnamon, for example, would be beautiful with an apple-based dessert. Those flavors go well together. But for me, this is that, it's peaches and ambrosia.
Yes, it really is. I think for me, it's, and I'm you saying about the apples not going as well with the custard, and I agree. I was thinking, oh, that might be an interesting one to try, but I find the Côte de Leon is so appley and peary that actually it needs, for me, if I was having a Côte de Leon, it would need a dessert where those are the forefront flavors. And maybe if it was some lovely sort of baked apple on just the palmier, that would be great. But the sweetness and that vanilla and the slightly verging into tropical, you're a little bit more very ripe orchard fruits. It's just, you need that lovely perfumed sweetness that I think the Gewürz is really giving.
Yeah. Members, if anyone's opened the Gewürz this evening, I appreciate it wasn't the most affordable of the wines tonight, but I think actually for a full-size bottle, I'm going to be honest, I think it poses the best value for money of, maybe the champagne. Society Champagne's amazing value when you compare it like for like with its stable mates like Krug. But I think for me, that Hugel it's something else, and it's a wine to savor and enjoy and think about, but it's still packed with pleasure for me. Absolutely. Oh, what a night, Catherine.
I know, and the sun's come back out now, so it's we've had a real.
You get the sun longer, I'm sure of it.
I think I'm higher up. But it's worked nicely because it was lovely and rainy and windy for the fish and the cheesy mash, and it was a perfect comfort food. And now the sun's come out and I've got this lovely tropical flavored wine with a lovely light and creamy dessert. So really great gastronomical evening.
I'm glad I could organise the weather for you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Oh, well, members, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. I have to say, French wine and French food, Catherine and I both were chomping at the bit to do this event, so I hope that you've enjoyed it as well. We will continue to keep experimenting with our meal kits, so if you have any ideas, members, please let us know. Not only just the meal kits as well, Catherine and I are running a sushi night where we don't send you the sushi, you go out and buy it yourself, whether it's from a sushi takeaway, if you're lucky enough to have one near you. We've got to go into Cambridge to do that, or also supermarket sushi, homemade sushi, but we've got some wines to pair. So if you are interested, that's on the website. And then of course, obviously we've got our cheese and wines. We don't have one on the site at the moment, as Ben from Fine Cheese Company has just had is on paternity leave, having just had a baby with his partner, and we will be speaking to him when he's back, getting the next one online. But for those foodie ones amongst you, please do keep joining us, and please do send us suggestions, because we love to do food and wine events.
And if French food and wine is really up your street, then you would like to see us in person, we do have a Bastille dinner on the 14th of July at the Wine Society HQ. So do check that out on the website as well. And we'd love to see you again, either on screen or in person.
Fabulous. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, members. I hope you do enjoy the rest of your evening. And I'm sure if you've got some open bottles, they will hopefully slip down easily for the rest of the night. From us both, a huge, huge thank you. And we hope to see you again soon.
Cheers, everyone. Good evening.
Cheers.